Thank you all. I see we've got the morning shift here with us. That's great. Well, look, thank you for coming out, and let me welcome you to this session. My name is Jason Geary. I'm the director of the School of Music, and I have the pleasure of facilitating this dialogue around the extent to which requiring faculty to have advanced degrees, as many of our institutions do, may stand in the way of, say, greater flexibility in the curriculum, perhaps greater inclusivity, different perspectives for students, and any number of things rooted in assumptions that perhaps need to be challenged. And I'm thrilled to be joined here by my colleagues to discuss this topic. David Geir, who is the Dean of the University of Michigan School of Music, Theater, and Dance. Joyce Griggs, who's the Executive Vice President and Provost at the Manhattan School of Music. And Patrice Jackson, an Associate Professor of Cello at the Berklee College of Music in Boston Conservatory. So how this will work, we've discussed this, and I'm going to sort of frame the conversation by sharing a few remarks and observations, after which we'll hear from Dave, Joyce, and Patrice, who will share some thoughts and perspectives of their own. And we really want to hear from you. We want this to be a conversation as much as possible, in part because this is not a topic that's frequently discussed. In fact, it's perhaps a little bit taboo to be talking about the diminishing importance of degrees within higher education. And I say that to make the point that we collectively don't so much bring expertise on this topic as we do a set of experiences, observations, and ideas. And your experiences, observations, and ideas are equally important as we consider this topic and its potential ramifications. So I'll be seeking questions and comments from you along the way. You can do that by using the app Slido. So if you go to slido.com and hashtag SphinxConnect, you can enter questions there, and those will magically appear here, and I'll share them with everybody. Or if you prefer to do things old school, you can make your way up to one of the two mics that we have here in the room, and we'll be sure to get your voice added to the conversation. So just to clarify here, we are talking about advanced degrees that are required for faculty, so that would include both master's and doctoral degrees, though I suspect that a lot of our conversation will revolve around the doctoral degree. And within that context, I would further suspect that less attention would be paid to the PhD, the degree that's awarded within fields like musicology and music theory and music education and sometimes composition, and more to the DMA, the Doctor of Musical Arts. That's the applied doctorate and performance-oriented, and that you get in violin, piano, kazoo, or what have you. And I say that not because I think anything should be off the table. It certainly is not. And we could imagine, for example, music education courses that are taught not by one-time K through 12 teachers who earned a PhD, but say practitioners in the field who are currently teaching and who may only have a bachelor's degree. But I suspect that a lot of the attention will be placed on the DMA because that's the degree where you tend to see the greatest amount of variance for job requirements within institutions, across institutions, and so on. So I did a little bit of research ahead of this session to kind of set the table for us. And I looked at a random sampling of 50 advertised positions in performance, including conducting, on the music vacancy list of the College Music Society over the course of the last 6 months. So that meant all types of institutions were represented: conservatories, schools of music within large public institutions or research institutions, departments within small colleges, liberal arts colleges, and so on. And what I revealed, what I found was this: of those 50, 15, so 30%, required a doctorate with no alternative, right? You had to have the doctorate in hand or perhaps be ABD, have done all but the dissertation, but there was really no question about that. An additional 11 institutions, so 22% of the total, wanted a doctorate or its professional equivalent. And that's perhaps a conversation in and of itself, what that is, how you determine what that professional equivalent is, how that might shape the behavior of search committees, and so on. 19 of the 50, so the largest group, 38%, required a master's degree but preferred the doctorate. Only four institutions required just a master's, and alone one institution required only a bachelor's degree. So if you take that in the aggregate, then 68% of all of the institutions required or preferred the doctorate, and 76%, so over 3/4, required an advanced degree. And what's also interesting is that if you leave aside the one institution, the lone institution in its own category, within each of the other categories, there was a cross-section of institutions represented. So at least in this relatively small sample size, it wasn't possible to make generalizations about which types of institutions required the doctorate, or for that matter, even the master's. So that kind of gives you a little bit of the sense of the kind of professional context or landscape within which to understand this morning's discussion. So what I want to do now is turn things over to Dave, who we agreed would go first. And again, I would invite you all, as you're listening to his remarks, or if you've had ideas or questions already, share those via Slido, or again, make your way to one of the mics, and we'll be sure to get your voice added to the conversation. So, Dave?
Thank you, Jason. So, welcome everybody. It's great to be part of this discussion. I think this is a very relevant and interesting topic. We had a preliminary phone call about this, and you know, in a short period of time, we discovered a whole bunch of different threads that we could pursue. So I'm going to try to add to the conversation or the topic by just introducing a few things for us to think about, and hope, in fact, that we can engage as the session goes on. I will say it's a little strange because the way the lights are set up, I can't see anybody out there right now. So just so you know, I'm talking to a black void. I would begin by saying that certainly at my institution, there's already a deep respect and a high degree of value placed on professional experience. And we do routinely hire people who do not have advanced degrees. And I think our preferred mode of advertising for positions is one of the options that Jason mentioned, you know, the DMA or commensurate professional experience. And it's widely understood that a body of work outside of academia is highly valued and relevant to our students and to what we are trying to achieve. We also signal our strong investment in that kind of experience in the way we have built out our non-curricular initiatives at our school, and I think this would be true at many other places as well. We have a program that brings in guests who are doing professional work and makes them available to students so that we can investigate their careers and understand and learn from them. We have a very strong connection with the University Musical Society, the presenting agency on our campus, as another avenue of connecting to the profession. So I think that we have a deep recognition that there's great value in the non-academic preparation of those who teach and are engaged with our students. So having said that, I think it is important to acknowledge that when you as Jason said, I think, or at least a reference, the PhD degree is a degree that translates well into the larger campus culture and environment. And so really what we're talking about in many ways is the kind of experience that attaches into performance or applied careers and how that translates into academia. So thinking about the fact that academic culture is largely shaped by the PhD granting disciplines, it tells you that there is a potential for a culture clash of kinds when you bring people from the performing disciplines or working in the field into an academic context. And I think that this is something that we reckon with all the time and is an aspect of this discussion that's worth thinking about as we evolve as institutions to be more embracing of and accepting of the non-academic background. I think we all know that the P&T system, promotion and tenure system, is one that is based on peer review, and so in that way it's self-replicating. It's a kind of system that reinforces pre-existing kinds of structures, and so in this case it reinforces the value of people who have academic degrees. And when you bring people in who don't have that kind of academic background, it kind of causes friction in that system. I think that the faculty governance system, much of what regulates how things get accomplished within university environments, really creates a certain kinds of obstacle for people who don't have not experienced that and don't understand that or haven't lived it. And so these kinds of conflicts or pressures or difficulties as they roll out in and of themselves create an obstacle to embracing people who come from outside the academic context, and it's something that we need to continually work on. And then a last point that I would bring up, and there's many more things to talk about here, is that this is a conversation that's not happening in public, but I will guarantee you it's happening in private. That is, it's happening in the academic context, and I've sat in many committees where job descriptions were being formulated, where this exact topic was discussed, and certainly key points in those discussions are the deep value of professional experience, but then this conflict, this internal conflict, the question, we are producing students who hold these degrees, we purport that they're valuable, and yet we're not valuing them in our own search processes. And so this is an ongoing discussion for sure. So lastly, I would just close by saying that I think this question gets at the heart of many core issues that we're dealing with now. How students prepare for the future, what they need for their futures, the very notion of excellence and how we define that, and that has a lot of ramifications for our institutions. And so I'm really glad we're having this conversation. I hope some of the things I've said open up some areas of conversation.
Great. So I know you guys are awake because I'm getting some really excellent questions here, which is great. Of course, they could be coming from people who aren't here, but nevertheless, I want to pose one of them to Dave, just sort of a little bit in response to what you were saying. And so one of the questions is, this general conversation that we're having around advanced degrees, do you see that as being related to challenges that higher education is facing more broadly around how to educate in the future?
I think so. I think that as I mentioned early in my remarks, we know that, let me frame it a little differently. Our students still come to our institutions because they're seeking deep disciplinary expertise. If they want to be a cellist, if they want to be a musicologist, or if they want to do anything else in areas that we teach, they want to really get deep foundational expertise in that area. And we have structures that have successfully prepared students in those ways. But I think they also want to prepare themselves for certain kinds of careers that we haven't particularly addressed. When I entered school a long time ago, I was only really imagined my future as being attached to an institution of some kind, either a university or a school district or an orchestra or some kind of self-contained entity. We know now today that our students are preparing themselves for careers that will combine many different activities, and in many ways they're going to have to create their own audiences. They're going to have to chart their own ways apart from institutional settings. And so I think that this question really gets to that notion, because we need to have people in our institutions who have done that very thing, who have created their own futures, who have worked outside of the pre-described paths that we shaped our institutions around. So I think in that way, this is a foundational question.
Yeah. And in fact, there are two questions that are somewhat related here, and they're along the lines of asking about the extent to which the requirement of advanced degrees is driven by tenure, or in some cases by what might be accreditation, threshold guidelines. And I should say that, because there's a sort of follow-up asking about the positions, the 50 that I referred to at the beginning of the session, whether those were tenure track positions, and indeed they all were. I should have qualified my remarks by saying that. So yes, and that sort of gets back to the point that you were making about the challenges that are sometimes involved in taking somebody who might have a certain level of professional experience, putting them within a higher educational context where PhDs, frankly, are still the coin of the realm, and so that tension does arise. And in fact, in many of those job descriptions that I referenced, there was an explicit statement that you could still get the job without a doctorate, but in order to be on the tenure track or in order to be awarded tenure, you had to have a doctorate. So sometimes those kinds of institutional strictures do play a role, and that, I would say, is where, again, differences in institution really come into play, because at some, very large, prestigious institutions that have, majority faculty with PhDs, like Michigan, you certainly can get tenure without a doctorate, and that the same would be true at Maryland. But I want to get some additional voices in and hear from someone who's working within a different institutional context. So, Joyce, why don't we go to you and hear some observations? I know you've been having some conversations at Manhattan that may be relevant in a broad sense to this larger question.
Sure. Well, first, thank you for being here. As David mentioned, it's impossible to see you all. And the lights are so bright on us that if I start to kind of like scowl a little bit, it's not because I'm upset, it's because I am like being blinded by them. So I'm not used to being in this kind of setting very often, but I'm so thrilled to have been invited by Sphinx and to have an opportunity to speak with all of you today. I have worked in two completely opposite paradigms when it comes to higher education. I spent 15 years at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, which is very much akin to the structures and the type of educational environment that David and Jason have been speaking about with their home institutions now. But for the last 4 years, I've been involved in working at independent conservatories. And through that model, there's not actually a tenure track system. So where I currently am at the Manhattan School of Music, we do have opportunities to engage faculty for multi-year contracts, but the system of hiring and any kind of promotion track that comes through a traditional environment, Patrice might be able to speak a little bit about this as well, just doesn't exist in the independent conservatories that I've worked for or I'm working for now. So what I thought I would do is give a perspective of, if you were to join an institution such as Manhattan or a school that doesn't have an appointment that is really on that tenure track, how can you think about preparing yourself as a faculty member to engage in these very important conversations, but around curriculum development? And one of the things that I have been thrilled by the opportunities that have come from Manhattan School of Music in the last 18 months, which is the time I've been there, is speaking with the faculty about developing new ways of looking at a curriculum that, along the lines of this title, has been rather rigid. We do think very deeply about the training of musicians and how that becomes a fairly prescribed curriculum. And oftentimes, people in leadership roles, both within the faculty and within the school, think about, are there new ways of creating opportunities that will both address that high level of discipline and preparation, but reflect something within the curriculum that creates more choice, more opportunities to experience a diversity of learning that might be within a class, or it might be more broadly within a curriculum, or shared curriculum across departments, so that you're not so siloed in this vertical track that the curricula also often promotes. And so I just wanted to share a couple of quick takeaways that are happening at MSM. Almost a year ago, right after SphinxConnect 2019, I had a meeting with my curriculum committee, and at that point I started talking to them about some of the themes that I was hearing here, and really what it led to was a lot of listening for me with the faculty to voice questions about if we were to create more opportunities within the curriculum so that either coursework or the content of the curriculum was opened up a little bit more. How do we add that in something that's already very, very packed and full, and time constraints are real for them? And so we embarked on a semester-long conversation that also was aligned with our strategic planning process, where we could identify as a school and with board support for looking at things of how do we define artistic and academic excellence. And one of the primary tenets of that goal is to create more opportunities for time and space for artistic and academic exploration for our students. And so it gets at really specific things like, how is the schedule for our students developed? These are very complicated issues, so while it's easy for me to say we're talking about them and we spent a semester discussing them, we're now a year later and we're still looking at the solutions, because you pull on one thread and it's almost not a house of cards, but it creates all of these other intangible or unknown questions about how do we really create those new structures for students without creating unintended barriers or complications for time to degree. So all of this is to say there's been a year-long conversation around both schedules, curriculum, trying to think about cross-departmental opportunities. And what's really exciting for me as a provost is that our faculty have really taken on this opportunity to engage in the conversation. And one of the significant ways in which they've demonstrated that is we just completed a survey to take the pulse of the culture of our institution as part of a cultural initiative that is coming out of, cultural inclusion initiative that's coming out of our president's office. And 75% of our faculty who took this survey said, if you were given the opportunity to learn how to diversify the curriculum, would you? And 75% said yes. And one of the things that is incumbent upon us as a school is to say, how do we help have that conversation and the learnings, but also as potential faculty members, if you're thinking about joining a school like David's, Jason's, or mine, how do you actually come to a conversation and an interview process where you can deeply engage and authentically answer the questions that our schools are asking and that we hope our faculty will engage in going forward?
Great. So I should say, though, I think both of our speakers have noted that it's a little bit hard to see. We can see, or at least I can see just well enough if there are folks at the microphone. So please don't hesitate if you're not using Slido and you want to be added to the conversation that way. We can still make out presences enough that that's a possibility. So I wanted to also, I mean, there are a lot of really great questions that are coming in, and I wanted to share one sort of in response to what you were saying, and I think this can also be commented on in sort of broad strokes. But the question is, what are your thoughts on pursuing an artist diploma or performer certificate as a replacement for the DMA in order to pursue collegiate teaching positions? So as anyone who wants to weigh in can.
I think it is a challenging question to answer, in part because to Jason's sampling of 50 jobs, you found 70% preferred advanced degrees. And I think
a little bit more, yeah.
More than that. So some of the things that I struggled with as I was also making decisions about a acquiring a particular degree after having been in the working profession for 7 years is not having the DMA going to become more of a hindrance than pursuing it, even if at some point it became unnecessary, right? So was it going to always be a barrier? And I think that the way, at least for myself, I was able to answer it was, I didn't want to have to wait to accumulate so much commensurate experience that would be the equivalent to what a school might see as a DMA or a PhD equivalency, which meant I would have to work probably another 20 years in the profession or pursue any number of competitions and other types of awards and accolades that could really almost demonstrate the other type of experiences that could be seen as relevant substitutions for the DMA. And that was a personal choice. I think one of the best things that you can do to answer that question is really have mentors and colleagues who can help you navigate the answer for yourself, because each one of our paths are so different that we need to be able to answer the question in a way that makes sense for us. And part of that is knowing what is your ultimate goal. And for me, at that point in my career, I knew that my track was going to probably persist through more administrative leadership, with teaching being a secondary role. And I'd be curious to hear from Patrice and David, who might have different perspectives based on the hiring and their own experiences of faculty colleagues.
I'll just quickly add, I think there is a lot of value in an artist diploma, but I think it would be a mistake to assume that it will be viewed as an alternative to a terminal degree like a DMA or a PhD. In my experience, search committees and institutions broadly do not see that equivalency. At the current time. And again, because those kind of diplomas or certificates are done within an institution, they also don't kind of answer the question of commensurate professional experience. So I think that those artist diplomas do have value as young musicians, young artists seek to kind of deepen their artistry and their expertise. But the DMA degree is understood to have an academic component, to have attached coursework to deepen the credentials of one so that they can enter an academic environment. And artist diplomas are really, as you well know, constrained to applied instruction and recitals and things of that nature. So I at the current time, I think it would be misleading for me to say anything other than they really aren't equivalent.
Do you want to add anything, Patrice? All right. Well, with that, then why don't we turn to you, because I know you have a slightly different perspective to offer, and so we're eager to hear what you have to say as well.
Awesome. Well, good morning, everybody, and again, thank you for coming. My name is Patrice Jackson. For those who don't know, I was the 2002 winner Sphinx Laureate of the Senior Division. So my perspective is a little bit different because now I'm in a position to be able to educate and teach on a higher level. I wanted to talk a little bit about my background because I'm a product of 2 educators, but I'm also a product of a long lineage of string players as well. So education and higher education in my household was very important. And my parents sacrificed a lot to make sure I not only had the best education that they could afford, but also had the best cello teachers in my corner to help make sure that I was the best cellist that I could be. When it came time to auditioning for Sphinx, I am thoroughly grateful for the opportunity that Sphinx provided for me. I was on a performance track. I wanted to be a soloist, and through Sphinx's opportunities, I not only was able to perform on a lot of stages, but I also was able to talk to people that looked like me, because I didn't have anybody when I was growing up that looked like me to actually be a mentor in that way. Later on, through school, I actually did not go the doctorate route. I had a conversation with a cello teacher at Juilliard. It was my 7th year. I had 3 years at Yale and 4 years at Juilliard, and then I wanted to stay an extra year and get a performance artist diploma. And we had the conversation after 7 years. Well, I think you should stay here and get a doctorate. I was like, I don't think it's necessary. And we had a conversation. I ended up winning that argument. But as time went on, I really did want to teach, and I wanted to be that role model that I didn't have, that looked like me. And that was very important to me. There was an opportunity later on. I was in a quartet that ended up having a summer program at Berkeley, which led me to Berkeley. And through that opportunity, somebody was looking at me. Her name, and I will say her name is Melissa Howe. And unbeknownst to me, 6 months later, she was looking for somebody to just cover one of her cello teachers because they were going on sabbatical. So that was my leg in to the school. Now, about Berkeley College of Music, it's a very unique college in the sense that in order to be considered to educate and teach there, there's different criteria. And I will say in the strings department, all of us have different things. I am one of the younger ones, but all of us have different paths. I personally don't have a doctorate degree, but Melissa saw beyond that and was very forward-thinking and intentional in bringing me into an institution like that. I don't play jazz. I'm not, I don't do rock or bluegrass and everything. I was intentionally brought in as the classical cellist, but she saw the importance of my presence in that string department for the younger students. Also, with that said, I also have, instead of a doctorate degree, what I call street cred. That's what your young folks say these days, right? So I have a little bit of street cred, and in an institution like Berkeley, that's what they look for. They look for artists, performing artists, and current performing artists, because the millennials that are coming along now, everybody's on Instagram. Everybody's on Facebook. So if I have a student that's 18 that might consider wanting to study with me, they're gonna scroll through Instagram, well, how relevant is she? And that happens all the time. Now, I do have a colleague in the strings department with me who was finishing up her doctorate and applied to be in the strings department. She's a little bit different because she also had her own band. While she was finishing her doctorate, she also had her first album was nominated for a Grammy. All of that stuff is higher street cred, okay? But that's the perspective that I'm coming from as a non-doctorate.
That's great. So one of the questions that we got, and I wonder if maybe you can speak a little bit to this, because you kind of did address it in your remarks, but it had to do with, given the fact that in many of these positions that I cited, there was a desire for, or at least the willingness to consider professional experience, that one's time might be, in fact, better spent out in the field pursuing such professional experiences as opposed to the DMA. So I wonder if you can maybe comment on that, Patrice, and talk a little bit about the thought process in your mind in terms of deciding to pursue or not to pursue the DMA.
Sure. In my case, it was very simple. I had 7 years in school. I figured if at that point I wasn't the best that I could be, I wasn't quite sure where I could go from there in my own life to study with somebody for 4 more years at that point in my life. If I were to consider a doctorate, because I had this conversation with my parents, the place that would have settled with me was Yale School of Music, not because I'm a graduate there and I'm an alum and all of that, but because their doctorate program is a little bit different in the sense that you have about a year or so of classroom academics, and then they send you off. That's your dissertation. You have so many years to formulate your own recitals, your own programming. It could be chamber music. It could be solo recitals. It could be competitions. It could be solo engagements. In my case, it would have been solo concerts and concerto work and all of that. And then after this allotted years, you bring all of that material back and you prove yourself. And that's an equivalent to them of having your dissertation to be able to have your DMA. Because of the person that I am, I'm not the brightest person in the world, the smartest person. I work very hard for my grades, very, very hard. But I'm not naturally smart. So for me to say I have to spend 4 years living in a library, doing all this research, for me that didn't work. And I learned so much. Now that I didn't do the doctorate though, I learned a lot in my non-classical experiences. I learned how to get along with contractors. I learned how to navigate through these different environments. I learned what to do and what not to do. If a celebrity is standing right here, I'm on the same stage with them. That's a lot. It's equivalent to being a jazz musician, because there's that conversation too. Going to school and learning how to play jazz versus going on a road with somebody like a Ron Carter or Wynton Marsalis or any of the other greats, if that makes sense. So in my case, for the type of person that I am personally, it worked. I'm not saying that that is okay for everybody. I have several friends of mine, colleagues of mine that have had doctorates, and it's worked out great. But in my case, and the type of person I am, that just didn't pan out in that way.
Yeah, that's great. So I see we have a questioner here. So introduce yourself, and we're happy to hear from you.
Sure. My name is Eva Mondragon. I actually completed my doctorate at the University of Maryland in May of 2018.
Excellent.
I'm a doctor
Great.
now. Thank you.
Great to see an alum.
Nice to see you again. I have kind of two questions that are combined, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the application process for new teachers. Since graduating from the University of Maryland, I've applied to dozens of positions, and I'm finding it hard to find, well, it seems like they're not really getting back to me, or either like I'm not standing out as a good person for the job, or they perhaps already know who they want to hire. And I feel like there's a really big barrier there between me and those people who are actually coming in for the interviews. And I know you made mention of the fact that musicians these days have to wear a lot of hats. And not only do I teach, but I'm a performer. I perform all over the place. So I'm wondering, what can I do as a potential applicant to make myself stand out, even though I have my hands and my feet in all sorts of different places? What can I do to make my career more successful in that way?
Great. Anyone want to?
What's your subdiscipline, or what?
Well, I'm a violist, and of course, I love teaching. That's one of the reasons why I went to complete my doctorate, but I'm also an orchestral musician. So I've been to the world's best summer festivals, like Verbier Festival. I've played in Grant Park last summer as a fellowship in the PI quartet. I've played in salaried orchestras thanks to Sphinx and SOPA. I've played with Kansas City Symphony. I'm now playing with Toledo Symphony. So I have some pretty good experience under my belt. And it seems like even though I have all of these wonderful things on my resume that I had to work really hard for, I'm not standing out some way. And I'm just really frustrated, and I'm almost to the point where I want to give up applying, because it's been a really difficult process.
Yeah. Well, first of all, congratulations. You obviously have a lot of great credentials. I think you said that you just got your DMA in 2018. So I think don't give up. It's way too early to give up. I think you are helping us understand how competitive the marketplace is. There's no denying that. When schools, when universities, colleges are opening positions, they are getting many applications, and there are a lot of highly qualified people in the field. The kinds of things that you just told me about in just a very brief period of time are exactly the kinds of things that institutions are looking for. I think, there's going to be a place that's going to be looking for somebody who has your qualifications, and it might take a little while, but it's probably better as a sidebar conversation. But it sounds to me like you're on the right track, and that question of what can you do to differentiate yourself from the field is a complex question, and would take some particularization. I'd have to look really closely at your credentials, but I think Patrice wants to add to this.
Yes, I would piggyback off of what David just said. I will say it like this. I'm going to give a little parable. If you want to be a millionaire, you can't hang out with people who are not. So do your research in the different schools that have openings. Get to know people. Email faculty, email if you're able to. I know a lot of times, especially with students that are considering coming to the different institutions, they'll send emails to the instructors and say, hey, I'm going to come into Boston. Are you available between such and such a date and such a date? I would like to meet up with you. That might even in turn turn into a lesson. Next thing you know, they're requesting me to be their teacher. In applying for jobs, it's the same thing. Unfortunately, a lot of these jobs, it really is about who you know. So I would strongly suggest you have everything that he just said, you have everything on paper. So you can't even give up because you're already there. So at this point, I would just do a little bit more research and try to get to know the people that are going to be in that hiring process.
And just briefly, I see we have some other questions that I want to get in, but what I would say is sort of general advice to everyone is to identify a mentor and make sure that that person is looking at your materials before you're sending them out. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to know how you come across, and you want to make sure that that cover letter is absolutely stellar and that it presents you in the best light. And I've also seen instances where people have been successful at getting to the semifinal stage, but they have not then been successful in moving beyond that. And so then the question becomes, is there something about your interviewing or style or something that's happening there? And that's where, again, working with a mentor who has experience in the field can really help perhaps identify some things that you may not have been aware of. So let's go here to a question and introduce yourself and tell us what's on your mind.
Good morning. My name is Teddy Hall, and I'm in a, different situation. I started on my DMA and had to pause it for financial reasons, but I have several years of experience teaching in higher ed public school, and I weigh the rate of return on finishing the doctorate versus the salary, because in my field as a percussionist, when those jobs come open, you don't have as many that come open as many as have DMAs. And I wanted to know your thoughts on the search committee process, the biases, also in small liberal arts colleges where you're expected to teach more than just your applied area, because you may have to do other subjects and so forth and so on. And so if you go for a DMA in that particular instrument, and then you come out, but you haven't had experience teaching theory, music history, working with band, teaching an orchestra, how do you continue to market yourself? Fortunately, I have Tim Adams, who's professor of percussion at the University of Georgia, as a mentor, and we, discuss these questions, and I'm still active, like I said, as a researcher and connecting with colleagues, but just wanted to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Joyce, you want to jump in?
One thing that, if you're able to, is to try and find opportunities to actually teach some of those other classes. It can be challenging. I'm not sure exactly if the question's about pausing the DMA or getting more. I'm sorry, Teddy, that you sat down. I wanted to try to clarify a little bit more. With regards to the opportunities, one of the things that you might also look at is what are the teaching assistantship opportunities within the schools that you're looking at for the DMA. And many schools now are trying to help give DMA candidates pedagogy classes. So if there are ways for you to have percussion as your major in this example, but also take a pedagogy class in theory or music history, so that you can start to understand how to build a curriculum or to lead a lecture class, that might be one way. Another is if there are resources, there's lots of community colleges, there might be arts high schools, if there's a way to teach classes there, just to continue to build those experiences and be able to flush out the resume or the CV in a more comprehensive way, I think would be some advice I would try to offer.
Great. In the interest of time, why don't we move on? We have another question over here, so introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Derek Wright, and I have a DMA from Arizona State University. Due to a lack of jobs when I graduated, life took me in a different direction, and I now own a successful music retail shop in Texas. I wanted to get your opinion speaking to the importance of learning how to do research and generate new knowledge as part of a DMA. Because even though I did not enter academia, that skill has been immensely helpful to me. As part of my music retail experience, I've been able to develop new products, really learn about acoustics, and these things have been successful, but I don't think I would have been able to do so without the ability to research and learn about new skills. My DMA was performance, so it had nothing to do with a lot of the things that I do now, but it seems concerning to me that I do see a lot of applied faculty without DMAs, but also just seemingly without not necessarily knowing how to do research and how to generate new knowledge. How important do you guys think that really is in a music educator?
That is a really good question and a good observation. I think that certainly at Michigan, we desire that our faculty not only be able to teach really well and prepare people for auditions and do the kind of practical, vocationally oriented parts of their job, but we also do ask that they contribute to the research mission of the university and be active in their discipline and pushing the boundaries. And if they're researchers, creating new knowledge, and if they're performers and doing creative research, doing the same kind of thing, expanding the repertoire, exploring the boundaries of their discipline. And I think that gets to what is the real deep value of a degree that we really haven't talked about in the best way, and that is that you would be learning not only those job-oriented skills, but you would be learning transferable values and sensibilities that help you in any endeavor and help support situations like your own, where you've taken the skills you've learned and turned them into some other kind of successful life. And so, and those include obviously, problem solving and critical thinking and communication and collaboration and all those sorts of things. So, I think that that's a really important point, and sort of to return to what we're looking for with regard to faculty, we would hope at Michigan that our faculty not only are deeply grounded in their discipline and can transmit those skills to students, but also embrace the larger intellectual environment in which they live. And at Michigan, that's considerable. We certainly offer a conservatory-like environment within the School of Music, Theater, and Dance, but we're housed within a remarkable research institution, and that is very much part of the overall value of the student experience, and one that I think translates into how those students live their lives in the coming years. And so, great point, very important point, I think.
Could I just add one more? I love that question, and it reminds me of the opening plenary when Michael Abels was talking about how we're really educating students for roles and jobs that don't even exist. And so I think that question really gets at the root of something that if you embark on a DMA or if you have a DMA, keep continuing to think about how do you leverage that learning so that you can explore beyond what you've already learned, but continue to open doors to new experiences.
Great. So I see that we have only about a minute left, so let's do this. If you could we have two more questioners, and I'd like you just very briefly share your questions with us, and we may have time to briefly address them, but at the very least, it will give all of us in the room a sense of what folks are thinking about. So if you would, here.
Good morning, all. My name is John Young, and I live in New York City. And my question is toward Joyce. Recently, the Manhattan School of Music hired Kelly Hall Thompson, who's an absolutely phenomenal concert violinist who's an African-American woman. And I was wondering, I don't think she has a DMA, but she has a tremendous amount of performance experience. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to know, how was she able to get that position?
Well, for the reasons you just mentioned, and again, we don't have a promotion and tenure or a requirement for a DMA. So for us, the primary hiring factor is looking at commensurate experience, and she embodies so many different types of experiences. As a classical musician, someone who has gone through the orchestral performance training program, has been on Broadway as the Fiddler on the Roof, and really embodies as a role model what we are trying to give our students as faculty, or as the faculty, like Patrice said when she wanted to become a role model as well as a faculty member. So that's just one small insight into that hire.
Great. So I'm afraid we are out of time, but I'd be happy to answer your question after the session, as I'm sure anyone who's on the panel and can stay around would be as well. But what I will say is this: I think this conversation really has opened up several kind of offshoots. In many respects, it was clear to me that in addition to hearing some really fascinating ideas from each of you on this notion of rigidity and flexibility and what that means in terms of requiring advanced degrees, I also heard a lot of questions and interest in both the process of getting a job and pursuing a DMA and using a DMA effectively, and so perhaps in some other session that would be a topic to pursue. So let me thank you all for your engagement, for your participation on Slido and here in the hall, and join me in thanking again all of our panelists for their experience and their observations, and thank you for being with us this morning.